In this video, I've given myself the challenge of painting Dante in the non-metallic metal style, which is how he's painted on the box. Join me on my journey of learning a new style of painting and taking my glazing skills to the next level. Together we can learn the techniques and ideas behind non-metallic metal painting and how we can apply this to our own miniatures. This is going to be a step-by-step guide showing you everything you need to know, so by the end of this video you'll have the confidence and knowledge to get your own Dante and non-metallic metal style miniatures painted. And if you stick around until the end, I'll also be showing you how to paint his power axe. Welcome to TableTopReady. My name's Michael, and in this video I want to have a go at painting Dante in the non-metallic metal style, which is a style I've never tried before. Before we start painting, we need to get Dante built, and I've chosen to build him using sub-assemblies, which is going to make our lives a lot easier, allowing us to get to places we wouldn't normally be able to get to so easily if we'd fully assembled him. I have created a full video talking about how I get my miniatures ready for painting, so make sure to go and check that out if you need some extra help getting your own miniatures ready for painting. When it came to undercoating Dante, I chose Mephiston Red. This is because you're likely to have that already if you painted Blood Angels, but you can undercoat yours however you want. I've always wanted to paint a miniature in the non-metallic metal style, and Dante is a perfect miniature to paint in this style as it's how he's painted on the box. Now we have everything built and undercoated, we can get started. But before we do that, I do want to thank the channel members and patrons who very generously support TableTopReady and make these tutorials possible. You can also support the channel and the content I make by giving the videos a like and leaving a comment. I really love hearing about your own hobby. As well, throughout the tutorial, all the paints and brushes I use will be shown on the screen as I use them, and I'll also link them in the video's description along with any other equipment you see me using, with affiliate links to where you can get them. Finally, I've split this video up into different chapters so it's easier to follow along with, and the first thing we need to talk about is what non-metallic metal is. Before we get started, I want to talk about what non-metallic metal is and the theory and ideas behind it, so we have a better understanding of this styling technique when it comes to painting our Dante miniature. The non-metallic metal style of painting a miniature comes from painting convincing metallics in a 2D image. The idea is to give the viewer the perceived idea that what they're seeing is real metal without actually using metallic colours. When we approach painting non-metallic metal on a miniature, it's going to be very different to how we approach painting a 2D image. In a flat image, the artist determines where the light is coming from, but this isn't going to work with a 3D object that people will want to view from multiple angles. If we keep only one point of light, there'll be areas of the miniature that are completely dark and left in shadow, so we want to first imagine 4 points of light, each at the 4 corners of our miniature, so there is a source of light no matter the angle you look at it. We can also use the shape and details of what we're painting to determine the tonal shifts on our surfaces. So if we break down our miniature into basic shapes such as spheres, blocks and cylinders, we can quickly decide where our light and dark points should be. Now that we have a better understanding of what non-metallic metal is and the ideas behind it, it's time to put it into practice, because the best way to learn how to do something is to actually give it a go. Let's now use what we've learned and see how we can apply it to painting Dante. We're also going to learn about the different techniques used, starting with the basics. We first want to choose our base colour, which all of our shading and highlighting is going to be built on. The colour I'm starting with is XV88, which is a great mid-tone colour to become our base colour, which we can build our highlights and shadows over. Using a mid-tone colour helps us achieve a better balance between the darker and lighter tones. If we started too dark or too light, then we could end up with a miniature that shifts more towards a certain tone. To get the best results when painting our miniatures, we need to think about how we're applying our paint. For best results, we first want to thin our paint, and I find an equal amount of water does the trick. I also like to remove excess paint from the brush on some paper towel first, which is going to give us more control when painting. And when you're ready, we want to keep our brush moving and avoid going over areas we've already painted, to prevent creating any unwanted texture whilst the paint is still drying. And once you're done, because we thinned our paint, it won't have covered very well. That's okay though, because we can just go in and paint another layer using the same process we just talked about. Painting in multiple layers like this is going to allow us to build up to a solid base colour without losing any of those details. It's also going to give us a nicer smooth finish. Continue building up your layers until you're happy with how it looks. Just make sure to let each layer of paint fully dry first before doing another one. It's important we always build up to a solid colour when painting our base colours, because any shading and highlighting we do after this is going to contrast better and make more of an impact. Now that we have our solid base colour done, we can start working on painting our non-metallic metal gold armour, and for this we need to talk about glazing. Glazing is a technique used to create tonal variation, smoother transitions, and to add interesting effects in a more subtle way to our miniatures. The first way we're going to use glazing is to create gradients where we want to achieve smooth transitions between our colours across Dante's armour. Let's start with figuring out where our lighter tones are going to be, and for this we're using Baylor Brown. And to make it a glaze we want to thin it down more than we normally would with twice the amount of water. This makes our paint more transparent, allowing the colours we're glazing over to come through, helping to create those transitions. When using a glaze, even though it's quite thin, we shouldn't think of it as a wash. We want to apply it in even thin layers. And if you want to build up to a stronger colour with the glaze, like layering, we can use multiple passes. The other way is to work our brush to where we want the strong colour. This is because the glaze will deposit most where the brush leaves the surface. Glazing is often seen as a more advanced technique, and we shouldn't attempt to do it until we think we're better at painting. But I believe that glazing is a very achievable skill with enough time and practice for anyone, no matter your skill level. To decide where our highlights should be, remember to think about the different shapes and contours of the armour and where those points of lights are. Alternatively, we can use reference, which we're able to do for our Dante, as there are images and a great turnaround on the Games Workshop website. I found this really helpful since it's our first time. Take your time using our Baylor Brown glaze to create our first highlights. And once you're happy with your first highlights, let's work on where we want to create those darker tones. For this we want to use Scrag Brown, and we're basically doing the same as we just did. It's worth spending the extra time and care at this point to get a nice balance between the different tones before we commit and make our gradients more intense. If you feel like you've overdone it and want to smooth things out more between the colours, we can use a glaze of the colour we're working from to create a softer transition, working the glaze in the opposite direction. There's a lot of work going into painting our Dante, so don't expect to be able to sit down and get him done in just one sitting. In fact, you're more likely to spend anywhere up to a week to get him finished. But the end results are always worth it, and by the end of it you'll have a miniature you can be really proud of once you're done. Now that we've decided where our lighter and darker areas are, let's continue to build on those areas even more. Let's start with working on those lighter areas of our gradients with a Somesi Desert glaze. Whilst doing this, try not to overdo it so we don't overpower what we've already done. Continuing our darker end of the gradients, our next colour we're going to glaze with is Doomball Brown. To finish our gradients, we want to use a Ushabti Bone glaze and then a Rhinox Hide glaze. Then once you're done and you're happy with how everything is looking, we can do one more thing to really help give the impression Dante's armour is made of gold. To help our armour look less flat and more vibrant, which we would expect if our armour was made of gold, we can use a glaze to change the hue and create more of a saturated deeper colour. For our gold armour, we're using some Cyan yellow contrast, and I've made this into a glaze again, but this time thinning it down with twice the amount of lime medium. We want to apply this Cyan yellow glaze in an even thin layer over our gradients, and as you do this you'll see what a difference it makes in our armour making more of an impact. Now we've got our gradients done, it's time to work on creating our definition, which is going to help bring out all those details and shapes of the armour even more. To create definition and help define the shape of the armour even more, we can start with a recess shade, which involves applying our paint or a shade directly into recesses and around details. For our recess shade we want to use Rhinox Hide, which we want to thin down like we normally would with an equal amount of water. Doing a recess shade is a more controlled way of creating definition than an overall wash, so we don't affect any base colours or work we may have already done. Take your time doing this, and if you make any mistakes it's okay to neaten things up if you need to. Now that we're done with the recessed shade, you should see how it's helped to bring out all the shapes and details of the armour, and we can now work on highlighting to help bring out those edges. The idea behind highlighting is to bring out any edges, areas and raised details to draw our attention to them and to make these features stand out more. And the most prominent way of highlighting, and the one we most associate with it, is the line highlight, and it's this highlight that we're going to be focusing on. This technique is a great idea to have a brush you vibe with, that you like to use, and I would keep it separate so it's always up for the task when needed. Again, we want to thin our paint and remove any excess on some paper towel first, which is going to prevent creating those thick blobby lines. And when you're ready, let's use some Screaming Skull to paint thin lines along edges and raise details to help draw attention to them and to help define the shape of things. To make this easier, we can angle our brush against an edge and run it along the edge to create the highlight. For the areas we can't do this, then we just need to take our time painting thin lines where we want our highlights. If you want some extra help with your edge highlighting and want to know how I approach it, then I do have a dedicated video on the channel showing you how. For me, learning to edge highlight this way is one of the most important techniques to learn and practice, because not only does it help to improve the look of our miniatures, but it also helps to improve our brush control and hand-eye coordination, making us better miniature painters overall. After you're done painting your edge highlights, we can finish our gold armour with some spot highlights. For our spot highlights, we're using white scar, and this involves painting little dots on all the corners of Dante's armour and at the centre of those highlights. This emphasises shapes even more, as well as add much needed reflections. With those spot highlights done, we've now learnt a lot about the techniques and ideas used to paint our miniatures, which means we can now move on to getting everything else painted. Now that we're experts on painting non-metallic metal, let's use what we've learned so far and paint the non-metallic silver around our Dante. For our base colour, we can use Eshin Grey, making sure to work up to a solid colour we can work from. To create our gradients, we can use a Dawnstone glaze for the lighter tones and then a Corvus Black glaze for our darker tones. Finish our gradients with an Administratum Grey glaze for our highlighted areas. Once you're done, we can do a recessed shade using Abaddon Black. And then highlight these areas first with an edge highlight using Ulfwyn Grey, and then a spot highlight again with white scar. In this section, I want to show you how we can paint some of the other details you see around Dante. We're going to start with all of those wing decorations, and for these our base colour is going to be Corax White. After you're done painting your base colour, let's do a recessed shade using Fenrisian Grey. We can neaten this up with our Corax White if we need to. Finish these wing decorations using white scar to paint some edge highlights. Now we can work on painting the black details, starting with some Abaddon Black. To highlight these details, we're going to start with a highlight we haven't talked about yet, which is a chunky highlight. We're using Dark Reaper, and this wants to be quite a thick line, so we can still see it once we've done our edge highlights after this. This is painted along any edges and around details. After our chunky highlight is done, we can paint our edge highlights using Fenrisian Grey, and then our spot highlights this time with Blue Horror. I know it seems like we're doing a lot of work to get our Dante painted, and you'd be right, but I just want to show you what's possible, and you should always only ever do what you feel comfortable doing. When we come to paint the laurel decoration around his head, start with some Incubi Darkness. Then we can use Cabalite Green for a chunky highlight, Cyberite Green for our edge highlight, and then we can finish this detail with Gale's Blaster Green for a spot highlight. For the red of the shoulder pad, paint them however you paint your Blood Angels, or you could even follow my Blood Angels tutorial where I'll show you how I paint mine. And before we move on to the final section of the video where I'll show you how to do the more interesting details of the miniature, let's see how we can paint those blood drops. We want to start with a dark base colour, which is going to be Galvor Black Red. After this, we want to get lighter towards the bottom, first with Mephiston Red, then Evilson Scarlet. We're then going to paint a line around the edge of the blood drop using Trollslayer Orange. Make this line lighter around the bottom edge using Tarlite Ochre. Let's finish with some spot highlights, first with a dot of Ungor flesh along the bottom and then a couple of dots of white scar towards the top. I think we're now ready to move on to the final section and have fun painting the more interesting details on Dante. In this last section, I want to show you how to get the different materials painted and then finish up painting his power axe. To get any parchment and scroll decorations painted, let's first use some Rakarth flesh for our base colour. We can then darken the more recessed areas of our parchment using a Baneblade brown glaze. Let's get darker, continuing with the Steel Legion drab glaze. We can highlight our parchment using Screaming Skull. And if you want to get fancy, we can use Rhinox hide to paint little squiggly lines for text. It's always worth spending that extra time and effort on those extra details and cool effects, especially for our characters. This is really going to help them stand out more and make an impact, impressing anyone who sees them. We're now going to work on getting Dante's loincloth painted, starting with Corm Red. We can now block in those black blood drops using Abaddon Black. We're doing this now so we can neaten up with our Corm Red if we need to. After you're done painting your blood drops, let's do a recessed shade to darken the shallow folds using Galvorbach Red. Now we can start highlighting, first doing a chunky highlight, picking out the raised folds of the cloth using Mephiston Red. With the chunky highlight done, the next thing to do is use Squig Orange for the line highlights. Finish the front of the cloth with Taillight Ochre for a spot highlight. For the back of the loincloth, we're using Corvus Black, Eshin Grey for a chunky highlight, then Dawnstone for a line highlight. To finish, Administratum Grey can be used to emphasise some of those curves in the cloth. The final thing to get painted on Dante is his power axe, starting with the handle, painting a base colour using Galvorbach Red. We can then paint the raised detail using Screamer Pink, and then highlighting these rings using Pink Horror. Throughout this video we've been doing a lot of glazing to get Dante painted, and we should all now be master glazers, and we should have no problem getting his axe painted as well. Using Stegodon Scale Green, we want to get our solid base colour done first so we have a good foundation to glaze from. And we're going to be working in a similar way to how we create the gradients around Dante's armour, starting with a Sotek green glaze for those spots where we want these glowing effects. Remember, with each colour we're glazing, we can help smooth things out using the colour we're transitioning from. Again, we can use reference if we need help to decide where we want these to be. When you're happy with how this is looking, just continue getting lighter first with a Temple Guard blue glaze and then a Baharroth blue glaze. Finish in with a blue horror glaze. Something that's going to help tidy things up and make things look a bit neater is to highlight the edges using blue horror. For the lightning effect, we can first use Baharroth blue to lightly paint our design. Then once we're happy with how that looks, we can be more confident and paint thinner lines of blue horror. We can finish everything off painting dots of white scar on corners and where our lines come together. I started this project wanting to challenge myself to painting Dante like he is on the box, in a non-metallic metal style, and hopefully show you guys how you can do it as well. And I was really worried at first about not being able to do it, but I'm glad I did and I'm really happy with the result. So let's see how it turned out. Before we see the reveal, I do want to say a massive thank you to Sunsong, who has recently donated to the channel. Thank you so much. If you want to support the channel as well and the content I make, then you can do that by becoming a channel member or joining the Patreon. Both give you early access to tutorials and you'll be kept up to date with what I'm doing behind the scenes. Dante is now finished, and I hope I've been able to give you the confidence and knowledge to get your own painted, and I hope you'll even give the non-metallic metal style a go. If you enjoyed this tutorial, then let me know by leaving a like and let me know in the comments below. I've got plenty of other tutorials on the channel, including dedicated videos to help you get your miniatures ready for painting, as well as helping you get better at highlighting, so make sure and go check those out as well. I really enjoy making these tutorials and I hope you find them useful. Make sure to subscribe if you don't want to miss out on future content, and I'll see you in the next video.